Welcome, chess friends. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can win straight from the opening by being alert, by knowing the themes which are typical for an opening, by calculating well, and by exploiting the opportunities that your opponent gives you. So we'll start off with this position from the French. And in this position, White played the move bishop d3. And we're still in standard theory. And now in the Lichess database, rapid and classical 1600 and higher, in the majority of the cases, Black plays castle and is lost. And of course, for a lot of Black players, when they would annotate the game, they would say, I castle, bring my king into safety. But why is this losing? Because after g4, the knight is under attack on h4, knight has to move. And after this sequence, with a double attack on the bishop on g5 and the pawn on h7, h6 to protect the bishop, and also to avoid the mate on h7, but now rook g1 is a very critical move. Queen takes h6 and Black is lost. So let's return to this position. So bishop d3. So in the majority of the cases, Black makes a fatal mistake, a castle. And but the interesting thing is that after castle by Black, in the majority of the cases, White doesn't seize the opportunity and just castles themselves. And only in 13% of the cases, g4 is being played. And g4 was the move that Sveshnikov played against Farago in the Christmas Congress 1984, the Hastings tournament, and he played the line that I gave before. And that was the time that Chessable didn't exist. Also, there were no engines, and he calculated this himself. Now, you might ask yourself, right, if I'm here, right, and my opponent castles, do I have, in the opening, do I have to, at every move, really think very deeply, like, what do I have to play? Are there any opportunities here? Because that takes a lot of time. And why did Sveshnikov find this move and the refutation of castle and find the move g4? Well, Sveshnikov, of course, was a well-known expert of the advanced French. And a common theme in this advanced French is to play the move g4 with two ideas. The first one, of course, is to chase the knight, and then afterwards to trap the bishop after the move g5. But the second one, right, imagine that White has castled, is to play g4, knight h4, knight takes h4, bishop takes h4, and then f4. So at the moment that's not possible because the pawn is pinned. But that's the second thing that White often does in this opening, is start an attack on the Black king by playing f4 and g4, preparing f5. And Sveshnikov will, at any moment in this opening, verify whether this theme applies to this specific position. So knowing the themes, not just playing the standard move, like bring your king into safety, right? Being alert of the opportunity and then calculating concrete lines instead of playing just on general principles will give you often a winning opportunity in the opening. And if you look, of course, how it can continue after g4, knight h4, and I prepared this video, and guess what? I got this line on the board in a blitz game on Lichess. And actually this whole line occurred. And after a rook takes c1, my opponent played king h8. So here also you have to think like how I'm going to win, right? If you play this line, you have to calculate it. It's not only f5. And I think it's beautiful, and I was happy that I found this move, king e2, because after knight e7, bringing a defender to the defense, I won instantly with the move rook takes g7, because rook g1 is following. So this is the first example. Let's move on to the next one of an actual game of one of my students. So you can see here the Scandinavian defense, and white played the move knight f3. So this is the Scandi with queen d8, and my student played bishop f5. And so I'd like to ask you to think about how can white obtain an advantage here. And in this Lichess database, only in 2% of the cases white was alert enough to grab this opportunity and get a significant advantage. And let me return to what I said about the French structure, that often you play g4 followed by g5 to trap the bishop, or you play g4 followed by f4 to start an attack on the king. Let's do the same here, right? So to see if we can find why this deviation from theory is actually poor. So after knight f3, right, the standard move is bishop g4. And now white challenges the bishop, and normally black continues like this, right? But after h3, we know that bishop h5 is a poor move because of g4, bishop g6, knight e5. So now if we go back and we say our opponent deviated from theory, let's take a pause. How can we exploit it? And we know that in the standard theory, after bishop g4, h3, bishop h5 is a poor move, then we might be part of the 2% of the players who plays the move knight e5 here, with the idea, right, normally the opponent in 62% of the cases continues e6. Now you see g4, so we get the same chase of the bishop, bishop g6, bishop g2, attacking the pawn on b7, c6, interposing, h4, h6, knight takes because the bishop doesn't want to be trapped. We damage the pawn structure, and after queen d3, white is winning. So knight e5 gives white a very strong position, and the best move according to the engine is here to play bishop e6, and that gives an impression of how difficult this position is to play for black, right? So 62% of the cases e6, and you saw the continuation with g4, bishop g2, and h4. And in 17% of the cases, so together 79%, there's queen f3 with a double attack on b7 and the bishop on f5. And in the case of knight takes e5, d takes a5, two pieces on the black side are hanging. So my message was, if you know the themes of the opening, in this case, the standard theory, you see a deviation, you can think about if you can use the typical themes in an opening to gain an advantage. So let's now go to the step 5 and step 6 and look at some positions where in all the cases in the Lichess database, the players didn't find the strongest continuation. And these are just the puzzles from step 5. And they all have to do with being alert, seeing the vulnerability in the position of the opponent, and taking advantage of that vulnerability, exploiting it. So in this position, right, so in 58% of the cases, black played knight c6 or bishop e7, so together 70% of the cases. Not grabbing the opportunity that exists in this position, right? So again, you can can imagine that players would annotate and would say, oh, I played bishop e7, preparing to castle and developing my bishop. Or they say, I play knight c6, right? Just developing my knight to an active square and perhaps preparing the move d4. But after knight c6, right, the real opportunity is gone, and white achieves equality. So what is the way to exploit this moment? It is to play d4, right? And then after e takes d4, c takes d4, the knight is awkwardly placed, has to go to b5, right? Now the pawn on d4 is twice under attack, so knight c6 defends it, bishop b2 attacks it one more time, and e5, the pawn protects it, and now the pawn is secured, and this is very good for black. And it also, of course, has to do with the awkward position of the two knights, right? So after a move like d3, there's a6 followed by queen a5, and the knight is in trouble, right? Because that's a double attack of the bishop on a3 and the queen on a5. So this is again an example from step 5, where you can see that most of the players don't seize the opportunity and just play a standard move. So let's go to the next example. Here it is even more extreme. So this was also a position that occurred in a game by and Nakamura's on the black side. So in the majority of the cases, the moves that are being played, knight f6, 34%, knight c6, or bishop f5, right? So total is above 60% of the cases. So the most played move, knight f6, right? You could say, oh, you know, I'm developing a piece, I'm challenging the knight on e4, and I'm 2 moves away from castling. All generic statements without taking into account the specifics of the position. So if you would calculate a little bit, right, and you know, of course, that one of the weaknesses, standard weaknesses in the opening is f7, you realize that after knight g5, actually white is better. So instead of grabbing the opportunity, black most often chooses a move that leads to a disadvantage. So how to take advantage of this moment? And only in 9% of the cases, black plays the move f5. So for a lot of black players, they might say like, well, this looks weakening to the diagonal h5 to e8, right? So it's unsafe. But you have to be concrete, right? So you have chess principles, but you have to calculate. And of course, that's one of the things that separates grandmasters or masters in general from club players. You have to calculate whether it's beneficial to deviate from the general principles because you get a significant advantage and how it will continue. And in this case, right, you can see knight g3, knight c6, and black has a very strong center. And white shouldn't go pawn hunting because after this sequence, black is completely winning. It's like +4 for black. And of course, there's a discovered attack on the queen, and black has the bishop pair, controls the center, and black is completely winning. So again, I think most people would not even calculate the variation that I just showed. But going back in the line, I think it has to do with not being dogmatic and saying I cannot play f5 because that's weakening my king, but being concrete and thinking about what the benefit is of that total control that you get over the center. And there's another thing, of course, in the opening, you try to mobilize your forces. And one of the ways to do that is to force your opponent into the defense. So in this case, right, you play f5, grab the center, and your opponent has to react, right? So there's no time to develop an additional piece. Your opponent has to react, and you accelerate your development and add force to your army. Let's go to the next example. So it would be nice if you pause the video and think about it. So if we look to this position, most played moves here, right? White is the move. Queen d2, bishop e2, bishop d4, bishop d3. All you could say, right? It's like, again, just a standard move. Queen d2, preparing to castle long, and perhaps playing bishop h6 after black castles short and starting an attack on the black king, right? You can just see that someone would annotate it like that. And that's played in 37% of the cases. In total, if you combine those three moves, it's 80% of the cases. But again, white doesn't grab the opportunity. So think for a moment, what is a vulnerability on the black side? And if you think about what is a vulnerability, then you will see this dark square complex. And you see the undefended rook on a8. And once you realize that, then of course finding the move is not so difficult. And only in 10% of the cases, white played the move knight a4, right? So this is, of course, again, you could say a violation of the principles because you move a piece for the second time in the opening, but it gives you a winning advantage, right? So being concrete is very important, and assessing how much advantage you get from violating those principles. And in this case, of course, knight b6 is an immense threat. And you can see that it doesn't even matter here. Of course, white is completely winning. Here also, white is completely winning. So this knight a4 is so strong. Right, the knight goes to b6. The rook has nowhere to go because the bishop on e3 is also covering the square on a7. So again, most players play a standard move and don't have the alertness to think, is there a vulnerability in the position of my opponent that I can exploit? So this one is actually very interesting. So this was from a game from Paul van der Sterre with white in the Lost Boys tournament in Amsterdam in 2000. And so this occurred about 40 times in the Lichess database, and no one played the winning move here that Paul van der Sterre found. And so think about this position and actually how to play it. And so in the majority of the cases, the moves that were being played is like queen c2, okay, like getting your queen to a useful square, putting pressure on the pawn on h7, putting indirect pressure on the pawn on c7, f3, preparing e4, gaining more control over the center, or rook c1, putting the rook on the half-open file. All standard moves based on generic principles, but not being concrete. So if you are being concrete, right, and probably black's last move was b6, you think about what is the vulnerability here? Well, those two knights are defending each other, and this knight is defending d5. And actually, two knights that are defending each other are often a vulnerability. I show that in another video. So the way to exploit it here is to play bishop b5. So not played in one of the Lichess games. No player found this. So let's see what happened in the game, right? Bishop b7. Now we can see bishop takes f6, queen a4, a6, bishop takes d7, b5, and white was completely winning. So bishop b5 right? So it's spinning the knight on d7, so the knight can no longer take back. So the threat is bishop takes f6 followed by knight takes d5. And then the idea is to add a second attacker to the spin if this bishop would leave the diagonal, right? So if you like say bishop b7 is being played, and now after queen f4, yes, c6 doesn't help because now black loses the c6 pawn, and after that the d5 pawn. So this is like a more difficult example where Paul van der Sterre realized that this pinning the knight on d7 in combination that now the threat is bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, knight takes d5. In combination of with the weakened light squares on c6 and b7 and a6, that this gives him a winning advantage. So let's conclude with the final example. Right, so in the mega database, the move, look at this position, you will not be surprised that the move that is most played here is bishop b4, right? So you add pressure to the knight on c3, you threaten to play d4, and you prepare to castle, right? So everything in line with general principles again. But after, we could say c takes d5, queen c2, black is only slightly better. So let's return bishop b4, how to exploit the vulnerability and basically seize the moment. And the way to do it is, of course, again here to play this move d4. And this is the move that Magnus Carlsen played. So you could see like players like Nakamura and Carlsen, right? They don't just go for standard moves. They always are alert whether there are possibilities in the position. And sometimes this means that they have to violate general principles, and they combine it with concrete calculation. So e takes d4, now the knight is under attack, and now bishop b4. Okay, so the king is still in the middle, right? White's king, and that's a problem. Bishop d2. And now the killer move here is, of course, d3 with the threat of queen e7, right? And you can also see that after bishop b4, knight takes b4, there's this double threat of queen e7 and knight c2, and black is completely winning. But even, right, if black wouldn't calculate that specifically, after a move like rook e8 and then d3, also exploiting the fact that his king is still in the middle, black is completely winning. So this was about step 5 and one example from step 6 in the step method about winning in the opening by being alert to opportunities that occur, and they can happen because someone deviates from theory. If you know the standard themes, you can look if that standard theme applies to that specific position. It requires, like I said, an alertness, but also what you have to do is calculate and not just go by general principles, but calculate and be concrete. And what we saw in all these cases, the metaphor that I use is in the opening you mobilize your army, and the question is if you can accelerate this mobilization by putting your opponent into the defense. And that's what we saw in all these examples. So I hope that you will increase your alertness in the opening. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, and I hope to see you again. Thank you. Bye-bye.